Tobin Fraley. And she's done both private work as well as public carousels, including the Elitch Gardens, San Francisco Zoo, Tilden Park in Berkeley, etc. And she now has her own studio in Albany, California. So without further ado, oh, by the way, Lise, when she's not painting horses, is an accomplished musician and plays music from the Balkans, Turkey, Armenia, etc. And she plays in a band with her husband. The band is Edessa. So please take a look for that on YouTube. And without further ado, Lise, here you are.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me to this. And I'm going to take you on a little tour of my studio, and we can start that video actually, and just talk about the techniques that I use for painting that I think are probably close to the techniques that were used 100 years ago, although our materials are different. So you'll just get a little idea of what's inside my studio right now. Let's see, we get over here to some artwork that my mother did when she was in college. And she was a terrific artist, well into her 80s. And there's some watercolors by her. And feel free, anybody, any questions at any point, please feel free to ask. This is an Ilians, part of an Ilians trim that goes on the Ilian Supreme. So I'm restoring all that trim. Well, I'm going to talk about that horse a little bit later. So just a little tour around my very small studio. Oh, this is more wobbly than I thought it was. This horse is part of the Ilian Supreme carousel that is now in a private collection. And Pam and I are doing all of the painting for that carousel, and Ed and Adriana Roth are doing the restoration work and read the trim and all of that. That's just a horse in primer, ready to go. There's a whole stack of those Neptunes, some original paint pieces on the wall, and that's my little studio. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll just show you some samples. Oh, that's so blurry, sorry. Of work that I've done for private collectors. We can go to the next. Justin, do I just tell you to change? I guess so. Oh, that's a Parker. We can go on. This is a PTC chariot horse, very rare actually to have them off of the carousels. Next. This is a lion for those of you who are going to be at the NCA. This is on the San Francisco Zoo carousel. And again, that's something Pam and I did together. We restored that whole, well, we painted that whole carousel many moons ago. All right. A Denzel rooster. This is a new carved by Ed Roth for a client. I know, I'm sure many of you are familiar, and a band organ because I had to put in a band organ. All right, so let's move on. I'm going to show some techniques. We can just start this video. This is a technique that I use for painting leather, leather saddles. And this is going to be kind of a long process. So I don't know, I'll talk through it, but if anybody has any questions, certainly feel free to ask. These are oil paints. And back this is a, what can I say? This is not a technique that I think the original painters to the carousel would have used. This is a very fine arts approach to painting, but this is something that we can now use for private collections. And also we do this for working carousels if we can put enough varnish on top to protect this delicate paint, because this is not easy to touch up. And when you have a working carousel, obviously you want the paint to be easy to touch up and for maintenance. So this is a bit of a more fine arts approach. And my thinking in this is to try to go for a worn leather look. So the paints are oil paints. I use my own paint medium, and it's a formula I actually learned from Nina Fraley back in the 70s. And for anybody who's out there painting, it's equal parts turpentine, boiled linseed oil, and flat varnish. And these materials are much harder to find these days. The varnishes are more difficult. Everything is the thinners that we use to clean, especially here in California, is much harder. They don't work as well as what painters 100 years ago got to use, that's for sure. So this is a stenciling brush, and I'm just starting to blend the darker color on the edge into the light color.
While we're progressing, I particularly noticed in your studio that as you were going around, it actually felt like a carousel ride.
Oh, that's sweet. I'm forever feeling like my studio is much too small, but I'm very fortunate to have it in my backyard, so no complaints. So this is a pretty tedious process, but this is a big stenciling brush, and now I'm just starting to work out the rough surface of the paint and getting all the hairs out. And I didn't film all of the process because this is, a long process, but probably from start to finish, this takes about maybe half hour to get it to a place where I think that it looks good. And the paint colors that I used on this, I believe was raw sienna, yellow ochre, probably some raw umber and a little bit of burnt umber, and then burnt umber with a little bit of black on the edge. So this technique you'll see in another portion of what I am painting as a demonstration. And these stenciling brushes definitely were used by painters at the turn of the century. They're stenciling brushes, or they're also called poncing brushes. And it's a great way to create texture. A lot of people will leave the leather looking like this, which has a lot of texture to it and a lot of interest in the surface. I'm used to taking it to a finer approach. And so I'm going to keep brushing this out until I can't see any transitions or any brush marks at all. So I'm going to pull up the chat so I see what people are saying. Question, blah, blah, blah. I'm finding this very relaxing. Oh, that's nice. I remember a story from Nina Fraley when I was working with her, and she did a giraffe and did all the spots like this. And she ended up, it was beautiful at the end, but she ended up with like a sore in her wrist. She got like a permanent bump in her wrist from doing this poncing technique. I asked them to mute the video because it really is kind of an annoying sound after a while. It'd be better if there was like nice music behind this. Let's see. Oops. Justin, how far along in this video are we? Oh, I see. Thank you. So can you see that the texture is starting to change? The edges are starting to blend. The blend between the colors is starting to, I'm trying to get rid of that edge. Okay, so this is a fan brush, and this is a very soft fan brushes. There are hard bristle fan brushes that you use to move wet paint around, but this is a very soft one, and you're not actually trying to, you don't want it to get wet very much. You're trying to keep it as dry as possible. So this touch is very, very light. It's almost like a polishing. And you're at this point, I'm just trying to get out the brush marks. And maybe you can see that the texture is starting to change and soften a bit.
The question is, do you do only one coat?
Yes, it'll just be one coat. Unless I feel that the color isn't quite right, then you can always put sort of a very thin glaze on top of this and deepen the color. So, but hopefully you get it all in one coat. And so what's happening here is, we can go to the next video, Justin, because it's just more of this. Okay, this is kind of a close-up so you can kind of see. What's happening is that base coat color, that very ivory color, is what's shining up through this brown. So it's not like painting a thick coat of paint on top of something. It's a very transparent look. So that, and then you can go to the next one. There you go. So you're seeing the glow of that base coat coming up through the leather color. So for me, this is about halfway there. I have a lot more of that kind of final detail work to do, but you can see that the effect of that as leather.
If I didn't know, I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know what?
I wouldn't know that it was fake.
That it wasn't leather?
That's correct. I would think if I just looked at this, I would say, oh, that's leather. She cut a piece and stuck it up.
Oh, that's nice. Well, that's a compliment. Thank you. All righty. Well, so let's go to the next. I decided not to do a whole demonstration on leafing because that's a whole like gold and silver leafing. That's a whole kind of world to talk about, but I did just want to run through some photos. You can see on the neck of this armored Carmel that I've put, it's a little bit yellow, and that is what's called sizing. And sizing is what metallic leaf sticks to. So this is, it's called a 12-hour size. It's a slow size. And the trick with leafing is all about waiting until the sizing is dry enough that it's just tacky enough for the leaf to stick. You don't want to wait too long or the leaf won't stick, and you don't want to go too soon or the leaf will drown, is the term they use. So that's the sizing. Next.
One size fits all.
Ha ha ha. Actually, there's a quick size. Okay, so this is aluminum leaf that I'm just starting to apply. Next. And next. And that's starting to push the leaf down, getting it to stick, pushing it into all the grooves. And next. More cleanup. And that's all the aluminum leaf that's going on this piece. And then the next, and that's with the gold leaf. And it's a big debate. We talk about this all the time. Anybody who paints talks about this. Do you do the leafing first and then paint the piece, or do you do the leafing afterward? And for me, it depends on the piece. This one has so much leafing to do that it seemed easier to just work around all the leafing with the paint, if that makes sense. All right, so let's go on. Okay, so let's start this video. This is a very quick, down and dirty kind of example of glazing on top of that leaf. So you can use aluminum leaf, you can glaze on top of gold leaf, you can glaze on top of white gold. I love white gold. It's very soft, but it not as it can tarnish with time. So this is a sap green and Prussian blue. And I'm just going to show you just a quick way to blend these colors. And you can see, again, it's very much like the leather technique in that it's a very, very thin coat of paint. And you want that underneath aluminum is what's shining through and will make this iridescent. So again, the stenciling brushes to help blend those colors.
Well, we know the aluminum looks like silver. Is the gold really gold leaf?
The gold that I have on the horse is 23 karat gold. And I mean, there are color charts for gold. You know, there's many shades of gold, and it all depends on what it's mixed with to determine the color of the gold. So again, it's that same very soft fan brush to start blending those colors together.
Does your wrist ever get like carpal tunnel?
Fortunately, I haven't had carpal tunnel. I am starting to get some arthritis, but I'm holding on. I wish I was more ambidextrous, but I am a determined left-hander, so I try to use my right hand when I can, but it doesn't go very well. So this is an alizarin crimson. I was just trying to throw on some colors just so you can see what effect it has on top of the aluminum and how you really can blend any colors together. And that edge creates its own new color in between, which is really beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to explore. And I would encourage anybody to try this. It's so much fun. And, you know, the worst thing that can happen is you just have to wipe it off. That's pretty strange looking, but okay, so let's go on to just some examples of, so this is glazing on top of, it's a combination of white gold and aluminum, and also gold. The leaves are gold with green glazes on top. So it's a real combination of different leaf, and you can see the different effects that that has. Next. Oh, somebody's asking, oil dries slowly. How long do you have to wait for drying? So because of the medium, the varnish helps things to dry, and these paints are very, very thin. So it dries, you have enough time to work it. You probably have a good 45 minutes to work on something, depends on the color of the paint. But past that, it will start to set up. But it's a good window of time. It's much more satisfying than acrylics. So just a close-up of some of those colors. Okay, next, yeah. That is all different leafing and color glazes on top of the different color of leaf. So it's a really nifty effect. You know, I don't think it's appropriate for everything, but I love it. I love this iridescent look. And it just lends so much depth to carvings. Let's see, we should have a carousel workshop. I'm just looking at the chat. What kind of varnish do you use? The $1 million question. We'll get to that. It's changing. It's a moving target. Pam, if you can, what's the one? Dephthane. Currently we're using something called Dephthane, which is a polyurethane. I mean, the varnishes that we could get 20 years ago were beautiful, just beautiful, and lasted forever. Varnishes that we can get now is, it's a real, I don't want to say, anyway, it's a kind of a crapshoot. How is a glaze different from paint? That's a good question. A glaze really is just thinned out paint. So, okay, so on this Neptune face, the face is painted. So it's a kind of an opaque look that you can use with a lot of shading with the colors and whatnot. And the glaze is very, very, very thin. So that you want whatever's underneath that glaze to shine through. So I'd say that's the difference, is in opacity. So any color can be a glaze, pretty much. White's tricky, but even that could be a glaze. Hope that answers that.
What would come through the mouth there?
Oh, that would be a support sweep on the carousel. So you can see how the piece is cut in half so that they can put it around the sweeps that go. This goes at the very top of the inside trim on the carousel. Yeah. So some of them have holes, some of them don't. This is the rooster's tail. Again, aluminum leaf with glazes. So you can really do a lot of fine shading with glazing with this kind of technique, and it just makes the whole thing look iridescent. Okay, let's start this video. This is an example. It's all going to look the same. This is an example of how to do a dapple gray, at least how I do a dapple gray. So this is painting on the base coat of the Dapple, which looks very close to my base coat. But that's going to be your background color for the Dapple paint. I think a lot of the older, you know, when the carousel painters back in the day had to paint these carousels, they had to get them out fast. And their techniques were very, very fast. And Rosa Patton is really excellent at painting amazingly fast and gorgeous pieces. I am not that fast. Pam probably can concur that we take a slower approach. There are faster ways to do dapples, but this is the way that I've developed. One thing that I'm looking for in laying down this pattern is to not have a polka dot pattern. I don't want the dots to be in rows, which is often what you see on original paint, that the dots will just be, the spots will be kind of in a row. I'm looking for something more natural, and so I'm trying to create a pattern. That's also why I'm not drawing the circles on. I don't want them, the dark color, to be a solid color. I want it to be broken up already. So again, these stenciling brushes are great. This is just trying to blend those two colors. Now I've got my dark color and I've got my base coat color. And the client, he's on here. I saw his name, Mike from Porsche Mendenhall. They wanted a dark dapple. And so this is going to be a little bit darker than I might normally do. But I think it holds up on an armored horse like this, where you don't see very much of the body. So you want the body to be substantial. So now I'm coming back in with some of that base coat with a tiny, tiny bit of white added to it to make those spots jump a little bit. Somebody said, I'd pay extra to learn. I'm looking at the chat. I'd pay extra to learn something like this hands-on. We used to do hands-on workshops. I love it. I love teaching this. So does Pam. Okay, so that's a big stencil brush to start blending those colors. And you just use that brush until you like the look that's, that you're going for. Do you want the spots to show more than that or less than that? You just keep using that brush and then coming in again with a fan brush to soften those edges. And by not making those circles in the beginning a solid color, it helps to kind of break up the pattern. It makes it so they're not just like circles and circles and circles. It creates an illusion. All of this painting is about creating illusion to me. The carvings are what are beautiful, and the paint is what enhances the carving. And we don't want to get in the way of that. We want to enhance it. And it's all about creating an illusion of depth I think depth is a lot of it. So again, I would work it until I was happy with the blending of those spots. So a full body like this could take up to 12 hours. It's a lot of this kind of delicate blending work.
It's a form of camouflage.
Yeah. Have I done the colors reverse? White on gray. White on gray. No, I haven't. That's a good question. I have. I've done a couple like that. It's unusual. Most collectors don't ask for that, but I did do a beautiful, beautiful blue roan with a dapple on it. And that had to have a base coat of the kind of blue gray on it, and then put the spots on top. So yes, absolutely, you can go the other way. Yeah. All right.
It's good that your horses are so patient.
Also, I might add that the 12 hours is straight. You can't stop and then start again. Is that correct?
That's right. Because if you do, your technique the next day is different. It just is, no matter how much you try. So there you can see it. And this horse, you're not getting the full benefit of what it's going to look like, but it's going to have blues, dark blues and burgundies and more leather, lots more leather. And that the silver on all of the aluminum is going to be glazed to be a pewter color. And the edges are going to be glazed to be a kind of a golden color. Yeah. All righty. Let's see. Oh, that is so blurry. Well, that's a dapple, but that's a very weirdly blurry picture. Sorry. That is in one of Tobin's books, actually. Okay, let's move on. Oh my goodness. I think that's my last picture. That's a really blurry picture. I apologize, but that is the end of my talk. Does anybody have any questions? Nothing. Well, all righty then.
Well, all right. Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, this is really amazing. It makes me appreciate even more the carousel I'm most familiar with at Glen Echo Amusement Park in Maryland, where I used to you get a free ticket for lunch and a ride in a carousel. For years,
wow.
I gave my ticket to a little child. Then I decided, wait a minute, this looks like fun. So I ride the carousel every time I possibly can. And now, as I wrote a note, the next time I see those horses, I'm going to kiss them and think of you.
Oh, that's so sweet. Well, it's the carousel
Lisa,
sorry, the carousel painters, we don't really, have the same kind of history that we have about the carvers. And their work was so temporal compared to the carving. So and going on into Pam's show will be really interesting, because looking back at original paint, some of it is so exquisite. So anyway, thank you all for listening to what I have to say about paint.
Just one
I have a
comment.
question.
Yeah.
Did you ever get back east to do any carvings on the horses back there, or the paintings? Or is it all on the West Coast?
I haven't in a long time, but I certainly would. And about the hands-on thing, I love doing that. Pam and I used to do that at Carousel West. We would do hands-on for people. It was very fun. And I'm always happy to teach people if anybody has any questions. I know Pam has taught people. You know, these are, none of it is a secret, you know, all of it is about spending time and learning how to do it. You know, but I'm happy to show anybody anything. And if you have any questions, reach out to me. I love sharing this, and there's, you know, I don't have an apprentice. This is all going to go away when I go away. So, you know, I'm happy to pass it on.
Lisa,
I'm located in Albany, California, which is near Berkeley. Somebody just asked that in the chat.
you there, Lisa? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, now I'll better appreciate the 6 carousels in Binghamton when I go and ride them and look at the painting on them.
Yeah, yeah,
Never thought about it. Now I will.
good. Well, that's the point of a presentation like this, to just show you kind of how it's done.
Yeah.
I was recently at Center Island. I was impressed that they've done restoration work on it since I last saw it. There were some beautiful metallic details on a lot of the animals.
Oh, nice. And there are the ways to do metallics. You know, there are metallic paints that are much easier to touch up than this kind of glaze look. Oh, I'm very echoey. But it depends if it's a working carousel, if it's for a private collection. It really depends on the techniques that we choose to use. No.
Somebody wrote that all the good varnish makers are dead. I think the reason California has very strict air quality, and they don't want VOCs, volatile chemicals in the air.
Yeah, yeah. Which is a good and bad thing.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I know that. One more thing. The same thing happened with Celastic. The original Celastic used acetone, and then they barred that, and now the newer Celastics are just not as good.
Mm. Somebody asked, how long will a paint job last with an outdoor carousel?
Mm.
Gosh, that's a very tricky question. It depends on what kind of paint. It depends on what kind of varnish, and it depends on what kind of maintenance. And maintenance, like Pam and I painted the San Francisco Zoo carousel, and the budget was big enough that we could really do this kind of artist approach to the painting. So it was wonderful at the end. It just looked so wonderful. And then they did zero maintenance. So now it looks not wonderful.
It also depends on how many people actually ride it and rub their butts against it.
Yeah, but you can keep, you know, Tilden Park held up extremely well because they kept up a maintenance there, you know, and that was painted by Nina in the 70s. And then Pam and I did a contract in the 2000s. When did we do that, Pam? And when in 2015 something, I can't remember. And I was amazed at how well the paint had held up. It was a different kind of paint. It was still oil-based paints, but it was like house paints. But it held up amazingly well. So maintenance is a lot of it.
What kind of maintenance are we talking about?
Keeping it clean, keeping at least all the high wear areas varnished. You know, I would, you know, there are other people that run carousels that would speak better to this, but probably, you know, making sure that those saddles are varnished every 6 months, you know, revarnished every 6 months to make sure that they're not getting a lot of wear and tear. Making sure that riders aren't beating up on things, that kind of thing. But it's all about keeping a varnish coat on top. If you can keep a good varnish coat to protect the paint, then it'll last. Yeah.
Can you hear me, Lisa?
Yes, now.
God, fantastic, Craig. Regarding firstly your maintenance, the maintenance, you are correct. On our carousel, Luna Park, the plenty of riders, we just took the varnish off every 2 years, revarnished it, patched up where it is, the colour absolutely perfect, and kept going, and still that's after 25 years.
Wow, good for you. How do you
Yeah.
take the varnish off?
Well, usually it's with whatever is the terps or whatever we've got that removes it gently. And that
Right.
doesn't then attack, if you do it quickly, it doesn't attack the paint, or we found it hasn't attacked the paint.
Well, good for you. And if you have people that are running the carousels that care about that kind of maintenance, then the paint will last.
Yep, we do it. Now, my next question, the more important, is we are now working on a facade. The big question has always been, how many horses or how many organ facades originally had gold leaf or silver leaf on? Most of them that I've seen of original always seem to have had the flamboyance or paint, not leaf, because it was so expensive. What's your thoughts?
Maybe I'm going to let Pam speak to that. I think she has more experience than I have with that.
Okay. Third and last question is, instead of your aluminium leaf, why don't you, or can you, or do you ever use aluminium paint?
The paint doesn't shine nearly as much.
Okay.
Yeah, you can, it's much faster, but
Yeah.
it doesn't, and you can put glazes on top of those metallic paints. And for some pieces, that's really appropriate. You know, golden and silver leaf is not appropriate for every piece, but, and so there are metallics that you can use to paint with, but they don't have the same kind of shine that real leaf has.
Yeah.
So it's a choice.
In my experience, that seems to be the difference between the American and, say, for example, the English gallopers or carousels. Would you agree?
That makes a lot of sense.
Thank you for your presentation. Fantastic. Thank you, Lise.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey, Lisa, do you have a question for you?
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have carousel horses that we kept on display at the Russian Carousel Factory Museum. We do have a master carver. I believe his name is Patrick, which we have a processed horse that we have on display in the carving area at the Russian Carousel Factory Museum, which is on the right side. But it's still in progress. So the parts that you can see, it's just all wood except the paint. It's actually gold feather on the bottom of the saddle.
And is there a question there, or is that just a comment?
What's just a comment? I'm just making a comment.
Okay.
And then
Interesting.
we do have horses that we kept on display. It's in the we keep in the paint area. We do have Armitage horses and also Spillman.
Good for you. I mean, anything you can do to educate people about this is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, I'm only known as a Bannocker guy.
Great.
So thank you again, Lisa. We're going to push on.
All right.
Because there's a lot of material to go through. And by the way, at the end of Pam's presentation, there will also be a Q&A. You can ask either Pam or Lisa any questions you like. So anyway, I'd like to talk to you. By the way, Pam has come east and taught at our place. So if there's enough interest, we could certainly talk about that. But she's been restoring carousel animals for well over 30 years. Was introduced to her craft by Tobin Fraley. I know who carved that. And she opened her own restoration studio, Hawkeye Studio, in 1990. She's been working on many public carousels, San Francisco Zoo, Golden Gate Park, Tilden Park Children's Museum, as well as Elwich Gardens in Denver, etc. Her restorations are in museums, private collections around the world. And when she's not restoring, she's hiking, bird watching, fly fishing, and practicing falconry. So there's an interesting story about this. Pam asked me to carve this is actually a two-sided sign that sticks off the wall. So you can see both sides, and then she painted it, of course. So, and I guess I should say that the reason it's called Hawkeye Studio, unless Pam, you're gonna say, is that hawks have vision that's 50 times better than ours, and they see details that we won't see. And I think Pam sees those details as well. So without further ado, Pam, here you are.
I just wanted to thank Lisa for the wonderful examples of our artistic magic. And introduce myself. I'm Pam Hesse. My studio is Hawkseye Studio. Next slide, please. Hello? Oh, there we go. I've done wood and paint restoration and conservation for over 35 years. This is one that I did not have to restore. This is a new carved piece by Tim Racer, and they're always fun to paint. He puts a lot of character. He pretty much does dogs, and he puts a lot of character into from the owner's dog into the carving. So next. This is a Muller standard. It was probably carved in 1907. You can see the 07 on the shield on the shoulder. Military horse. Next. This is an Ilians, probably a lead horse on a carousel. There's usually one that's a little bit fancier than everybody else on the carousel, and that's called the lead horse. It's also a signature piece because it has made by MC Ilians on that little shoulder field. Ilians were often displayed on carousels with gold leaf manes, and if they didn't have a hair tail, a gold leaf tail. Very flashy, lots of jewels. Next. This is one of the favorite pieces I've painted, and it's a Philadelphia Toboggan Company hippocampus, half horse, half sea creature. And this particular carver worked for PTC, Philadelphia Toboggan Company, for a long time, and I really love his artwork. This was a lot of work to restore, but I was thrilled to do it. Next. I started out back when dinosaurs roamed Oakland at Tobin Fraley Studios as an apprentice to none other than Lise Liepman, and went on to open my own studio. What exactly do I do in my studio? Besides looking out the windows at cool stuff, because I live in the desert, I restore and or conserve carousel stuff. But what exactly does that mean? What is a restoration? It's an attempt to return an object to its original condition. That would mean that on a horse like this, which has park paint on it, I would strip it. I would repair anything any cracks, any areas that need building up. I would build up. I would carve missing pieces. Then I would prime, paint, and leaf it. Next. And that's what it would look like when it's been restored. This woodwork was done by John Hughes.
What a difference.
Yeah, you can flip back and forth if you want to show before and after. This is a Denzel armored horse, an early Denzel. Very unusual piece. Okay, next. Then what is conservation? It's an attempt to preserve an object in its current condition. And this is a Muller parade horse, and it has a yellowed varnish that's full of dirt, et cetera, over it. You can see there's cracks in the necks in the neck, there's wear. And I would not fix any of that. Next. What I did is I removed the varnish, that yellow varnish from the animal. This is what the client had asked me to do. Some people like that yellowed look, but he wanted it back to the original paint colors. This is the original paint layer. That white is what they put on, and that's probably a lead-based white. Next. This is what the horse looked like after all the varnish was taken off of it. So you can see it's a very different animal than that yellowy green thing that was in the first slide. Next.
How long does that take?
It depends on how much varnish is there and how fragile the original paint coat is underneath the varnish. I basically work at small areas at a time, like, I don't know, 6 by 6 inches, and work my way through the horse. So you can imagine it can take, I don't know, about 5-10 minutes for a 6 by 6, up to an hour if the varnish is being very difficult. So it's hard to judge something time-wise on that. I hope that answered your question. Carousel animals and band organs were painted with lead-based paints, lead-based primers, oil paints, Japan paints over that, and then varnished. If you can go back a slide, just this is an example of going back to original paint. The orange on the bottom is park paint. The blue-green, that's the next layer up with the blue on the edges, is probably a factory repaint. And then the silver on the edges with the pale yellow in the center is probably the original paint surface. So oftentimes you can get a carousel animal that has, oh gosh, 10 layers of paint, 15 layers of paint that the park paints just put layers on to protect the wood. And the more layers they put on, the better the horse is protected.
So they at least did one good thing.
Yes. Sometimes their repairs are not so good. They use a lot of screws and nails and metal straps to keep legs on, which is not the best thing for them, for carousel animals. Carousel animals were finished either with gold and aluminum leaf, and Lise showed us that in a wonderful set of pictures. Sometimes with a transparent glazing. Again, she went through that. Next. Or they use bronzing powders, and bronzing powders are finely ground metals in a clear varnish. They can be painted on as opposed to painting a sizing on, waiting for it to set up, and then laying leaf on that, cleaning up all around the edges of the leaf and putting a varnish over it. The bronzing powders had some problems in that they're finely ground. Brass and copper, bronze mixed, and they tend to oxidize even with varnish over them. So oftentimes you'll see bronzing powders turn kind of a dark brown.
And they get everywhere.
The bronzing powder?
Yeah, it just
Yes,
flies.
it can. It can. Okay, next. So what is original paint? Original paint's a decorative paint layer that the factory put on, and it often increases the value of a piece if it's on there and in decent shape. A lot of times you'll see original paint covered by a factory repaint, and then layers and layers of park paint. This is an E. Joy Morris deer, and all of the paint on this right now is park paint. Next. This is the same deer with the park paint taken off the trappings. And I think it's a lot more visually interesting. And it's kind of fun to find all the little cool design stuff that they put in underneath that. I will be in painting areas that are damaged and cleaning up some edges on things. And then I will be keeping this in the original paint. Next. And of course, I'm going to talk about band organs. Band organs. Sorry about that. Next. I do a weird kind of archaeology. It's digging through layers of park paint to find the original paint. And I got this facade from, sorry. I got this facade from Art Rieblitz, and this is a condition that it arrived to me in, minus the drums and the cymbal. It had been overpainted, but underneath this was original paint. The illustrations to the left and right of the screened area and below the screened area are original paint. Next.
Was that the Musical Museum in Deansboro, New York?
I don't know.
So
Okay.
Pam, we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Somebody wanted to know, is that a 105? And do you use stripper or do you scrape to the original paint? And how do you go about doing that? How do you reveal the layers?
I don't use stripper because it's hard to control how far down it goes, and I don't want to affect the original paint surface. I don't want to damage it with the stripper. So I use a scalpel blade and very gently chip the paint off. And what was the other question? I'm sorry. Yes, it is a Wurlitzer 105. I'm sorry.
So the left and right panel is before and after taking the yellow varnish off?
No, actually, this is the two panels. If you want to go back one, you can see the left panel is fairly damaged and the right panel is in what I'd call better shape, but it's actually been overpainted. Next. So these are the two drum supports. I don't know the technical terms, so you guys have to forgive me if I say the wrong technical term. The brown areas that are carved are actually, that is old bronzing powder. That's how dark it can get. And you can see on the left panel that some of the overpainting that they did is chipping off. Next. So I took a scalpel blade and chipped off more of the paint, including the overpainting that they did on the original illustration of flowers on this. So I cleaned off all the old, that lighter white paint, and the original color is that yellow, that cream color underneath. However, that cream color has a layer of varnish on it, so it's a little yellower than it would have been when it first came out of the factory. Varnish tends to yellow. It's an amber color from the oils, and especially with exposure to sunlight, it tends to yellow. Okay, next.
Well, if you're using a scalpel, do you also cut your lawn with a cuticle scissor?
I don't have a lawn. I live in the desert.
Oh, you save a lot of time.
Yes, I do. This crown piece, or the top piece, again, has a lot of oxidized bronzing powders on it, and it's been overpainted. I ended up stripping this completely because there was some areas that needed repair. Next. And this is it after it's been stripped, and the white is epoxies that I used to build up areas that had been damaged. Next. I recorded the original colors and repainted it with those original colors. However, the client wanted this to be a little bit flashier than it would look if I had used bronzing powders. So I used gold leaf and aluminum leaf and did some glazing over it. The color, the cream color, is what the original color was of the band organ. Next.
Did you touch up the edges there to give them a little darker aging look?
Yes,
As you,
that's one of the things I do when I paint something. It gives it more of a 3D look. It pops the carving out from the back, so it makes it look a little antique-y. So yes, that's
nice.
Two different colors that are blended, as Lisa showed you. Okay, next. There were illustrations of birds above the screen area, and I pulled all the old overpaint off. I touched up what was damaged on the original illustrations. I in-painted it, and then I painted right up to the edges of it with the paint that I had mixed that matched the original color. I also did some gold leafing around the illustrations in the screen area. Next. This is the drum support after the flower's been in-painted and the panel painted and leafed and glazed. Next. And this is the finished piece, ready for music, minus the drum supports. And that's all original paint that you see there that's exposed.
Came right out of the factory.
The illustrations were cleaned, and I put a reversible varnish on them before I did any in-painting in areas where they were damaged. Reversible varnish can be taken back off so that if anyone ever wanted to get back to the original layer, they can take it off, and they will also take off my in-painting. So that's the Wurlitzer 105. Next. I also worked on a 146B Wurlitzer, and this is how it came to the client. That white paint and the decals Don't do it many favors. Next. This is obviously black and white, but it's from the original catalog, Wurlitzer catalog. And you can see it looks very different. Next. The client did most of the wood restoration. I had to do some restoration of certain areas, but he did most of the wood restoration, and there was quite a bit to be done. This is discovering the original paint. And again, there's the scalpel blade, and I'm scraping off that white paint and those decals to get down to next. This kind of marble thing, marble technique that they used. This is very typical for Wurlitzers. And the edges of this would have been painted with bronzing powders. I did discovery on original colors over the whole thing. I do little strips. I'd scrape little strips up so I could see how colors changed or did not change. And then I recorded them both with a camera and a color wheel in the same picture so that I can get exactly the same colors. And I also took, well, we'll just go with that. Anyway, next.
You took a lot of time is what you took.
Yeah, next. There were roses in the side panels that were kind of badly damaged, but they were still there. Next. And then this crown piece with these lovely horse decals, 1950s. I started chipping paint off of this next and found underneath the Wurlitzer logo. Next. You can see it was kind of beat up, but it's still there. Next. And that's the piece with all the overpainting taken off of it. Again, the bronzing powders, the gold is kind of brownish. The bronzing powder silver area is oxidized also. And there was a crack running through it, so that had to be repaired before repainting. Next. I did a watercolor of the original paint colors that I discovered under all that white paint. And this is what it would have looked like when it came out of the factory. Next, the two side panels had illustration boards, which I took back to original paint, but they were very badly worn and faded. The client had decided to have them repainted, and he had a painter which he took them to. Before I sent them off to the painter, I covered these original illustrations with a reversible varnish so that if anybody ever wanted to get back to them, he could remove everything above this and get back to the original illustrations. Next. There were decisions to make. Because of the price of gold leaf, we decided to do a lot of the gold with bronzing powders, which is the way Wurlitzer originally did it, but instead of using the ground metal, I used mica ground very fine that's colored gold, so it will not oxidize. There were areas we wanted to bring out and sort of pop out, like the flowers, and those are gold leafed with glaze on them. Next. And this is the facade finished, almost finished. The roses were not put back on, illustration roses, but everything else is done. And you can see the illustrations that the painter did match what was there. They're just brighter. And the two center panels, the client decided to have illustrations done on those also, instead of the blue marble look. Okay. Next. So what do you do if you have original paint, but it's in really bad shape? If it's not the colors that you envision for the final look of your band organ. You can see that Pepto-Bismol pink was not, this is Bob Stumer's Bruder, and that Pepto-Bismol pink is not what he wanted on this band organ. So he sent it to me. Bob Yorberg had painted or carved a bunch of areas that were missing and added some new things to it. But in general, it was in this kind of shape. The paint was chipping off and it needed a lot of work. Next. So I stripped it. Next. Repaired. Next. Primed. Next. And painted and leafed it. This is his golden egg. And this is the final, this is the final look of the band organ. Bob Stumer did these wonderful illustrations and had them printed on canvas and cut the canvas so that all I had to do was lay them down and glue them down. And then we put those on last after I'd painted everything, painted and leafed everything. And the Yorberg Bruder is due to Bob Yorberg's carvings and additions. And the golden egg is one of his carving masterpieces. Next. And this is a 165 band organ. This is an all new facade that Bob Yorberg carved. I know I'm not an advertisement for him, but I've just seemed to work with him a lot. And so he carved this, took all the measurements from an original 165 and carved this as a reproduction, but it's a little bit beefier. The carvings are a little bit deeper than the original. So Bob carved it, and it arrived to me with these beautiful illustrations that were painted by Marguerite Jr. And I did all the painting and leafing around the illustrations. Next. Glenn also found 2 band organ figures for a 165. Some of the pieces were missing and he had them recarved, but they were sent to me in this condition. And while there was a little original paint left on here, it was not going to fit with that facade. So I decided different colors, sent him watercolor sketches of what I proposed. And once he okayed them, I painted them. And these are the finished pieces. Next. And next. So these are similar to what original paint would look like on these, but it's obviously not the original paint. And please understand, I'm not advocating only sticking to original paint on a band organ or a carousel animal. But I'd rather suggest that you consider incorporating the history of your band organ into its final look. It
This
doesn't
looks like-
mean that a facade has to look dull. And as the Victorian lady climbing onto the carousel horse said, next.
This looks like a porcelain doll.
Lift that skirt and flash that ankle. And thank you, that's the end of my talk.